Good morning. It is Thursday, November 28th, and we're going to call the Corporate Administrative Services Committee meeting to order. I'd like to welcome everyone. Thank you for being here and acknowledge that we're within the territory of the Sechelt First Nation. We have an amended agenda. The only difference to the agenda is the addition of a closed portion at the end. Otherwise, it is as presented. Are there any other changes to be made to the agenda? All right, I'd like a motion to adopt the agenda as amended. Moved, seconded, all in favor. Thank you. And first report, Chief Financial Officer.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I also wanted to open the meeting with some introductions, if I may. So in the back gallery, we have a few new staff. And so I wanted to first introduce Colin Ho. He's our new Manager of Financial Services. And so he comes to us from the city of Calgary, and he started on November the 14th. So he's getting his feet wet with jumping right into things with the regional district, so trial by fire. And I think you met Kyle Doyle, our new manager of asset management, and we have Colin Joseph here, who is, or Darren Joseph, who is, sorry, with the regional district since 2014, but he has not been into the board room very often, so you may have seen him around, but you'll be seeing one of his big bodies of work today. He's our asset management coordinator. Thank you. So the first item on the agenda is the audit planning letter, and the purpose of the audit planning letter is a requirement of the auditors to communicate with the board as they start their annual external audit process. This particular communication is to give an opportunity to the board to provide any input to the auditors as far as any specific areas of concern or areas that the board would like to have the auditors have some attention to. Again, the purpose of the audit is a financial audit. It's not a performance audit. And so, again, these are statutory requirements as set out by the Local Government Act. So if there are any questions or anything you'd like to pass on to the auditors, this will be the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. So first I'll look for a motion to receive all the reports. Moved and seconded, all in favor? Thank you. And then there was something we talked about yesterday. Let me find it in here. There we go. Asset retirement obligations.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So one of the items that has been highlighted in the audit planning letter are some of the new accounting standards, and these were highlighted as part of the presentations of the financial last April, and even this prior year, so when it was being contemplated by the Public Sector Accounting Standards Board. So this has may have a significant impact to the regional district, and staff are currently developing a project plan as to how we're going to address this new standard. This new standard will require all public sector entities, so this includes schools, hospitals, local governments, to record their liabilities for legal obligations that they have for decommissioning assets. So these would be things for facilities that have asbestos in them. They might be things like having leases with a province where we took on bare land and then constructed facilities like our Mason Road Works Yard. So if we ever wanted to leave that particular site, that particular lease says we have to leave it in the way that we entered into that particular site. So we would have to decommission the fuel, storage, etc. So the area in our financial statements that you'd be familiar with this type of standard would be the landfill liability, closure, post-closure. So what will happen with the new standard is the liability for landfills will roll into this particular standard, including all of these new additional liabilities. So it could have quite an impact to our financial statements, to our balance sheet, statement of net debt, net assets right at the moment. So we also may need to engage consultants in order to do some assessments of some of our various assets to see what the impact is to us. So the standard has to be implemented by December 31st of 2022. So next year we're going to be starting on that project quite extensively. So more to come on that in the future. There isn't anything in the budget yet because we're not quite sure as to what we'll need any external resources for and if it's for this year or next year.
Thank you. Any questions by the board? Director McMahon.
It sounds to me like this would affect the balance sheet but wouldn't have an actual cash implication. Is that true?
Staff?
That's going to be one of the decisions that is going to have to be made by public entities is to how they will potentially fund them. So the short answer is no, but in the case of landfill liability where we have an eminent requirement to fund that particular item, you most certainly will want to fund certain things that are coming up soon.
Yes, Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair. This is on page 2. I'm looking at the $200,000 number there, and I'm just wondering about the significance of the $250,000 versus the materiality number. I'm trying to understand the scope of the $250,000.
So page 2 of?
Oh, right. I got page 2 on the agenda package at the top.
It's also on page 7 where it talks about materiality. Is that what you're?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. And Tina? Page 7, under materiality. Preliminary set at 1.35 million.
Yeah, so essentially our materiality is reviewed on an annual basis, and so that's not the question.
You're looking at why is it set at that value?
No, that's not quite it. It's the $250,000 was drawn out as something of interest, and how that is that a significant number, 250,000 compared to the materiality? I'm wondering why it was drawn out as an intention item.
Okay, it's top of page 2, first sentence. Thanks.
So essentially, it was something that was brought to the attention of the auditors that we had missed some contributed assets from taking over. So it's really a choice, and management chose to record it and disclose it in part because we didn't have to because it didn't meet the materiality test. But so essentially, it's our choice in order to book that. We felt it was significant enough, especially because of the local service area impact, that we disclose it in the financial statements.
Okay, any other questions? Director Hiltz.
I'll take, in the auditor's report, it was about, what page are we on? It's on page 3, best practices. So what I'm trying to understand is who decides what the best practices are? Are they always endorsed by an authoritative organization, or do we make them up on our own? What actually constitutes a best practices, I guess, from an accounting perspective to limit it to that?
Staff?
Yeah, that's a good question. Best practices would be things, any white paper or audits that have been reviewed by the Auditor General for local governments. That adds a significant piece. It would be anything within Government Finance Officers Association best practices. So there's a lot of white papers through those particular entities that local governments follow. There would be anything from public sector accounting standards and anything from a regulatory body.
And generally accepted accounting principles.
Well, those are required. Those
right.
are given.
But those are best practices as well, right? Okay. So in other words, the people who handle the money coming in aren't necessarily the ones who deposit it or do your accounts payable, right? There's different separating tasks, those kinds of things. Those are best practices. And then they layer on all the other organizations. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just sometimes best practices are kind of, this is the best that we're doing rather than an authoritative body, and that as CFO is saying, the white paper makes it the best practices. It has weight behind it, opposed to just considered a good idea. So it has more authority. So yeah, it's the white paper aspect that kind of makes it more authoritative, and the organizations behind the white papers.
Okay, any other questions? So there is a recommendation on page something. Page 1, sorry, and that the audit planning communication from BDO Canada LLP with respect to the audit of the financial statements of the Sunshine Coast Regional District and foreshore leases for Hillside for the year ended December 31st, 2019 be received. Moved, seconded, all in favor? Thank you. We'll move on to next item, and we have a presentation for this. So we'll ask staff to come forward, and we will move aside and give them the floor.
Okay, thank you, Chair. And what we'll do is if the committee has any questions along the way, if they want to, you can just raise your hand and interrupt, or we can take questions at the end, whatever your preference is.
Thank you. Good morning. Today's presentation is the result of recently completed a wastewater service review and focuses on the current state of the wastewater assets. Before we get started with the presentation, a brief review of the evolution of asset management in the ASRD. The Asset Management Coordinator position was created and filled in 2014. It was acknowledged at that time that asset management had been practiced in the organization for many years, albeit in limited capacity, despite not previously having a dedicated asset management position. The first edition of the Corporate Asset Management Plan was accepted by the Board of Directors in 2015. The focus of that plan was to identify the inventory of assets, the assets' replacement values, and the shortfall in funding. The plan was high level and did not get into the detail of subsequent multi-year capital plans and divisional asset management plans. Advancement of asset management in the organization between 2016 and 2018 included implementation of a computerized maintenance management software, completion of condition assessments on various types of assets, and the development of 20-year capital plans for recreation and protective services. Detailed wastewater local service area asset management plans were prepared in 2019 for each of the wastewater treatment facilities maintained by the SCRD. These are the first comprehensive asset management plans produced for the organization. The presentation today will highlight some of the information and lessons learned from creating these plans. All right, so that is our overview for today. First, I will touch on the 5 core asset management framework questions and link these questions to the recently completed wastewater local service asset management plans. I will spend most of the presentation detailing the current state of the wastewater systems. This will be achieved by answering the following questions. What do we own? Where is it? What is its condition? What is its useful life? And what is its value? Next, I will touch on sustainable long-term funding. During this presentation, I will not be discussing the potential funding strategy mentioned in the local service area asset management plans. The slide on long-term funding can be considered a precursor to a staff report preparing for January 2020. The final part of the presentation will be a glimpse into what's still to come now that the wastewater local service asset management plans are complete. The Corporate Asset Management Plan from 2015 indicated that being able to answer the 5 core asset management framework questions would be required to further develop asset management in the organization. The framework continues to be the target for establishing a comprehensive asset management strategy. The current state of the assets is the focus of today's presentation. Knowing the current state of the assets provides the foundation for answering the other framework questions. In the recently completed wastewater local service asset management plans, Staff considered the optimal levels of service required for each service area. Further discussion is required to determine whether defined levels of service align with the pillars of sustainability. Perhaps the easiest of the 5 questions to answer, essentially all wastewater systems are deemed to be critical and to sustain performance, since there is rarely any redundancy in the system to accommodate for failure. In the wastewater local service asset management plans, potential annual and operating costs and asset replacement options were provided with associated costs. While life cycle costs were not specifically identified, future life cycle costs could be derived from this information. Finally, probably the most difficult question to answer involves long-term funding for the wastewater systems. This topic will be briefly discussed later in the presentation. In the local service area wastewater asset management plans and throughout this presentation, the wastewater assets have been categorized by 3 systems based on their function. The following provides a brief description of each of the systems' function. So let's start at the beginning. Wastewater is produced in homes through toilets, bathtubs, sinks, dishwashers, laundry machines, and similar sources. Wastewater from residential property is conveyed through a series of underground pipes from the property and eventually terminates at the location of the treatment facility. The majority of our collection systems are under road right-of-ways or private roads. However, approximately 5% of the system is located in the rear and side yards of local service area residents. The treatment system's purpose is to remove residential contaminants from water. The treatment process varies from a single settling tank to multiple tanks with the process being aided by mechanical and electrical equipment. The resulting treated water, called effluent, must meet regulatory requirements. Finally, once treated, the effluent is piped to either a drain field, which is a series of underground perforated pipes in a dedicated field where the effluent leaves the pipe and percolates through the soil before reaching the groundwater, or an ocean outfall, which is an underwater pipe that is anchored to the ocean floor where the effluent is dispersed into the ocean. There are 15 local service areas, or wastewater treatment systems, that the SCRD owns, and 2 wastewater treatment systems that the SCRD operates and maintains, but has not yet established as a local service. Each service area only funds the operating and capital expenses in their own system. The SCRD is not responsible for operating and maintaining wastewater systems in the District of Sechelt and the Town of Gibsons. In order to operate and maintain the 17 treatment systems, SCRD staff are required to have intricate knowledge of 7 different wastewater treatment methods. The wastewater treatment systems are spread out across 75 kilometers of the Sunshine Coast from Langdale to Saginaw Ridge. The location of all the collection systems have been captured in our GIS. Staff can access various data in GIS, including attribute information, as-built drawings, and links to CCTV inspection videos and reports to review pipe condition. In Area A, we own 7 wastewater treatment facilities. Pender Landing has been shown on the map but has not been established as a local service area. In Area B, we own 4 wastewater treatment systems. We own 1 wastewater treatment system in Area D, 2 in Area E, and 1 in Area F. YMCA Camp Alphastone has been shown on the map but has not been established as a local service area. All right. The condition of the treatment and disposal systems was based on staff experience. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, a question on the as-builts. Just kind of the interpretation between as-builts, as construction, and as is currently. Was there a separation, or I'm just wondering about the control of, as-builts was how we intended it be, construction is how it was built, and then kind of how it is now in terms of the data of the drawings now. Is that complete, the as is, or are you still dealing with kind of as-builts?
Thank you. The term as-built is typically referencing an engineer's stamp drawing as to how the system was constructed at the time. There's not been a lot of changes to many of the systems to actually have to need to update the drawings.
I notice Malibu isn't mentioned there. I was wondering the status of the Malibu system.
Thank you. Malibu is not included in the review of the wastewater systems. It is a location where we own a permit, but we do not operate or maintain the system. The review of the wastewater systems for the purpose of the asset management plans and the wastewater service review was for those systems that we actually operate and maintain at this time.
Thank you. We, in our bylaw, if we own the permit, we're responsible for the operation of that plant as well. So it's our responsibility. Yes. Such as, say, Pender Landing, we're operating it right now, but it's not we don't have a service area there.
Right, but if they're talking about Malibu, we don't operate it, but we're responsible.
Yes.
They would need to report to us regularly so that we know when they're in and not in compliance.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you for this question. Last week at the Infrastructure Services meeting, I indicated that we're working with several of the owners to bring them into to establish service area and bring them forward. So a report on Malibu specifically is coming forward early 2020. And I think it's appropriate at that time to answer these questions as well, given that we're able to then provide a good picture of what the options are, what the current status is. It's coming.
The condition of the treatment and disposal systems was based on staff experience and consideration of predefined criteria, including age and performance history. Wastewater mains were inspected by CCTV camera in 2018. The table on this slide shows the most severe defects noted, the likelihood of failure, and how many pipe segments were assigned that grade. It's important to note that a defect does not represent a failure of an entire pipe segment, but rather a specific location on that pipe that has been compromised from its original state, such as a crack in the pipe due to root infiltration. Repairs to defective pipe segments will be prioritized based on their likelihood of failure. Some of the grade 5 defects were already known to staff, and a portion of them were repaired through a 2019 budget initiative. So from the table, you can see the worst grade defect is 5, and at the time of the CCTV inspections, we did have 11 of those, but as mentioned, some of those have now been repaired. The second grade is 4. We have 6 of those in the system. Those are the most concerning defects noted by the CCTV camera. Grade 3 shows a moderate defect, but may not deteriorate until sometime in the future. Grade 2 and grade 1 show very minor defects that will just be monitored at this time. The current slide shows the overall rating of the systems. Staff are looking into potential options to repair or replace systems that have been noted in fair or poor condition. For many of these systems, the condition rating was primarily influenced by the system's age. So not all systems are fair or poor because of problems that they're currently encountering. I'd like to note that under the collection system, Greaves Road and Canoe Road show not applicable, but were given the color for a condition rating of poor. Individual service connections convey residents' wastewater in place of a designed collection system at these locations. The poor rating is because the current method of conveying wastewater carries a significant risk of failure and can be very costly to repair. Establishing collection systems at these locations would provide a reliable and safer service to the users.
I noted those, and I was curious in that they're individual pipes going to our plant rather than a community collection system. I would have thought we would have left those individual pipes as a problem for the individual owners. So I was wondering why that wasn't the case.
In those systems, as noted, like the Greaves Road specifically was inherited that way, and when there's issues with the pipes in the boulevard, we have repaired them, and I think the community expects us to repair them, but they're their own lines, as in Canoe Road. I don't know if I answered your question. The repairs we've done at Greaves Road, no. The Canoe Road, I don't know if we've ever repaired any out in the road.
It was just a philosophy, I would have thought. But I guess we didn't sign an agreement when we took it over that the homeowners owned those. That's probably where we got ourselves into this. Is that correct?
Yes, I think it's a bit of a gray area, specifically in Greaves Road. The sewage is bubbling up on the shoulder of the road. Which line is it? Which property owner's line is it of the 6 or 8 properties? And the call always comes to us.
Sounds like we're stuck then, eh?
Okay, this slide represents the condition of the systems in Area B. One thing to note is that the disposal system, the ocean outfall for Jolly Roger and Secret Cove, is a shared piece of infrastructure, so it has a shared rating here. Finally, we combine the treatment systems for areas D, E, and F on the same slide. And I think let's leave it at that. If there's questions. No? Okay, so what is its useful life? These useful lives were determined by staff based on experience and information available in the greater engineering community. We see that collection systems typically have approximately 85 years. Little rough to say, considering we haven't had the pipe in the ground that year to know how long it's going to last or when it's going to fail. Treatment systems typically do last 50 years, and disposal systems have an approximate life of 40 years. The lifespans are all estimated, and systems will from time to time last longer or fail earlier than expected. A few things to note in Area A. Greaves Road drain field has a negative value. This system is currently operating beyond its estimated useful life. Lee Bay has multiple years listed in the collection system. This is because the area was developed in stages and the collection system expanded as lots were developed at each stage. And the drain field at Canoe Road has been assigned a higher useful life than the typical drain field. Unlike most drain fields, the unique design at this location does not require underground pipes to distribute the effluent. and therefore was given a higher estimated life than regular.
On Lee Road, I noticed that the primary dispersal field has never been used, and dispersal fields typically have a 40-year lifespan. I was trying to figure out why it's shown as 19.
19 years is based on the construction age. I understand that the field has seldomly been used in its time since it's constructed. And as previously mentioned, these numbers are just based on construction year and estimated life. They will last longer or shorter in some instances.
Thanks.
Canoe Road, is it? I didn't actually read that one. So is its distribution field been upgraded? That's the question. So what gives it that 50-year life? It's a different. It looks like it's an old construction. It's 82. So no. Okay.
The drain field and the treatment system at Canoe Road was recently replaced. It's a brand new system. Okay, based on the age of Greaves Road Treatment Plant and Drain Field and the Merrill Crescent Treatment Plant, feasibility studies are recommended to be conducted in the next couple of years to determine possible replacement options and replacement costs. As the systems start to fail, it becomes vitally important to have a plan in place for their replacement. In Area B, all the disposal systems are ocean outfalls, and you'll notice that their estimated useful life is greater than the drain field. Similar to those older treatment plants in Area A, the Jolly Roger and Secret Cove treatment plants are nearing the end of their useful life, and they also need feasibility studies to be conducted in the next couple of years to determine possible replacement options and replacement costs. Part of the study should consider whether amalgamation of these two local service areas could lower overall operating and capital costs. A portion of the original collection system in Square Bay is in poor condition, even though it's not nearing the end of its estimated useful life. It is believed that poor installation and ground conditions have affected the pipe's longevity. Go ahead. Sunnyside and Langdale or other locations where feasibility studies should be completed to determine possible replacement options and replacement costs. Langdale's treatment system is inoperable and a portion of the drain field has failed. They are currently utilizing the treatment system in Ocean Outfall with the YMCA Camp Elphinstone. Thank you. Some of the criteria for determining the condition included age and mechanical failures or repairs that had to be done. Other criteria considered the ability to meet the effluent standards of its permit.
I'm a little confused about the Langdale disposal field. I thought in the report it said that the percolation aspects of the disposal field is in good condition. So that's I'm sorry. I got the wrong red box. Right. Well, no, the disposal system, that's the field is at 2 years. That the field itself was in good condition is what the report suggested, I thought. Is the breakouts were dealt with and it was the...
I have on the chart that the disposal field is listed in fair condition. So we do have one section of the field that had failed, and that ended up leading to the connection to the YMCA Camp Elphinstone treatment system. Where percolation tests were done on other locations of the field, it revealed that there was good percolation at those locations. So we don't have a problem with the entire field, we just have a corner or section of the field that is a problem.
The Langdale system basically has been hooked up to the YMCA, essentially, hasn't it? It's not really being used anymore. How do we test for the effluent coming out of the Langdale? They all share the test as it hits the outfall. That's what's happening?
Thank you. The Langdale wastewater plant and the YMCA wastewater plant they're next to each other. So what we did was we connected the Langdale plant, basically made it into a septic tank, and the effluent goes down to the YMCA treatment plant, and then the discharge from the combined flow from the YMCA camp and the Langdale system is monitored for its flow and quality before it's discharged to the outflow.
Thank you.
So then the solids at the Langdale plant are still separated out previously, and that's an operational issue still, the septic and the solids of the Langdale system.
Yes, the Langdale system has an old RBC that has a rotating biological contactor that has a chamber in there and a clarifier and then a pump chamber, and we're using that as a way to settle out the solids, and then the sludge is handled as per a normal septic tank.
So a follow-up, so you could say that the pre-treatment is still operating then, the secondary isn't. That would be how you'd characterize the Langdale system then?
Yes, that's correct.
Wrong one. Director Ties referenced the low flush toilets. I know in the Gibson's treatment plant, with people and our reduced water consumption, it has impacted quite severely on the operation of the treatment plant, and they've had to sort of adjust accordingly to compensate for the low flows. With a lot of the design of these systems that were presumably designed pre-low flush toilets, is that impacting on the efficiency of some of the systems with the low flush toilets?
I would say Roberts Creek Co-Housing has done a really good job at reducing their use of water flow. It's a portion of what their plant was designed at, but I'm not at the specifics of the design, but there's certainly parameters in there for compensation for high flows, that type of thing. So plants are designed to engineered specifications, and with the new low flow toilets that are reducing and other things that are reducing flows into the plant, it makes it challenging in wastewater. Sometimes having the full volume helps treatment.
Yeah, I'm going to follow up a little bit on that theme that there's the two aspects. There's the strength of the wastewater, so if you have less volume, you have a higher strength. And then there's the volume to move through the plant. So is it a strength issue that we're really dealing with in the co-housing, or is it kind of a volume issue?
We're currently working on that right now with another plant as well, the type of plant it is, and I think it's probably due to volume. The tank size relative to the maximum flow to the flow that we're currently getting. One part of wastewater treatment is you have to keep the bugs happy, and they don't like it watered down too much either. So you don't want the bugs sitting around too long, and you don't want them going through too fast, either. It's a happy medium. So no, I wouldn't suggest putting rainwater in the wastewater plants.
Well, that change of systems of how the characteristics of the wastewater has changed over time. Is this affecting other plants? Like, they were designed for a certain set of conditions, and times have changed, and those conditions have changed the characteristics of the water. Have changed. So has that chemistry changed part of the asset management? Are the designs that were designed able to deal with the changes? Yeah, the flexibility of the initial designs require something, and so they weren't predicted on the low flow, so the designs never anticipated this. It's an unanticipated consequence. And so is that looked at in the other plants?
I don't think it's necessarily the strength of the effluent that's causing an issue. It's the flow. So if you build a new treatment plant for full build out, and that takes 20 years, it's challenging to run a large plant, a plant designed for the full build out. We certainly have discussed options like trains, putting in more trains rather than one large train.
The combined value of all the wastewater systems and all the local service areas is just over $31 million in 2018 dollars. With a replacement value that high, the wastewater systems certainly have significant value. Using data from a historical construction cost index, a 5% annual inflation is projected for future infrastructure replacement. As you can see from the chart, the projected replacement value of the wastewater systems will then double in 15 years and triple in 23 years. With most of the wastewater systems expected to have a useful life exceeding 23 years, the actual replacement cost of wastewater systems will be many times greater than today's replacement value. And while the value of replacing infrastructure grows exponentially, it is not anticipated that there will be an increase to the number of benefiting parcels within each service area. So you can see at the bottom there that the projection for 23 years would be greater than $90 million for the same infrastructure. So to put this in a bit of perspective for you, I used the system from the previous slides that had the closest replacement year, and that would be the Roberts Creek Co-housing drain field. Its replacement is estimated to be 24 years' time from now. So using this information, the drain field was originally valued at $164,000 in the wastewater local service area asset management plans. Based on these annual inflation projections, the drain field will cost almost $500,000 to replace when it's due for replacement in 2043, or approximately $16,000 per parcel. So here's a look at the combined replacement values for each service area. You'll note that the value is quite drastically different from area to area. Lee Bay is quite large, Greaves and Canoes is quite small. It's very dependent on the number of residents in each one. So maybe we'll take a look at the number of parcels here. The number of parcels in each local service area is defined in their establishing bylaws. Area A is the home to local service areas with the highest and lowest number of parcels. So Greaves at 6 and Lee Bay at 178. That is the combination of the collection, treatment, and disposal systems in 2018 dollars. Okay, next, please. So taking the total replacement value and dividing it by the number of parcels in each service area, the end column now shows you what the replacement value is per parcel. You will see that Saginaw Ridge has a disproportionately high replacement value. This is primarily due to having the greatest total length of the wastewater mains in all the local service areas. Lee Bay is a close second in total length. However, looking at the column before that, you will notice that Lee Bay has 178 parcels, while Saginaw Ridge has only 29.
Saginaw Ridge, was it built just for those 29, or was it built in anticipation of the other 3 land areas being subdivided?
I believe it has a maximum of 40 parcels that can be built, but currently has 29 identified.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, next one. The final column represents the combined operation and capital reserve amount that was available at the end of 2018 and shows it as a percentage representation of the replacement value. So 2019 reserve percentages will be different than what's shown, as some local service areas have made contributions to the reserves, while others have used reserves to complete ongoing operational or capital works. These reserve percentages would not substantially benefit parcel owners if the systems were required to be replaced today. Oh, and of note, Area A is also the home to the lowest and highest reserve percentage. So Lee Bay at 6.4 has currently the highest reserve percentage, and Saginaw Ridge, which was just established as a local service area last year, does not currently have any reserves.
On the reserve percentage, is the goal to have the reserves at 100% when the asset is done? Yeah, I'm just trying to figure that out.
So from a process perspective, I think one of the important outcomes of doing these types of plans is for us to be able to generate some type of policy as it relates to reserves. So those would be forthcoming discussions about what type of reserves should be set from a policy decision. And, you know, there are also some philosophical discussions to be had with that because in the case of Square Bay, as an example, without a grant to replace the plant, they would have had quite an assessment to each of those properties. So that's going to be part of the contemplation, and we're going to briefly mention some of those things towards the end when we talk about the financial strategies.
Okay, in Area B, you'll notice that Jolly Roger and Secret Cove have been assigned the same replacement value. We consider those treatment systems to be virtually identical, and that's the reason for that. A bit of a range in number of parcels in each of the service areas. You'll notice that the replacement value per parcel here is actually much more equal from service area to service area. And in Area B, the highest percentage of reserves in place right now is 4.5% at Jolly Roger. So once again, we have areas D, E, and F shown on the same slide. We have some comparable parcels in Roberts Creek and Langdale and some comparable replacement values. Okay. Once again, the replacement value per parcel is fairly balanced in this areas as well. And here we have some relatively higher percentages of 4.8 and 6, but still not necessarily going to be able to replace a lot of infrastructure with those reserves. Okay, so as we previously discussed, we can anticipate replacement costs growing exponentially. However, it's not likely the number of parcels within a service area is going to change at all. Some questions to consider when developing a strategy for sustainable long-term funding. Who should pay for the future replacement of the infrastructure? Current parcel owners or future owners? Is it better to start saving money now? Do we wait until closer to the time of replacement to start saving money? Or do we borrow when it's time to replace? And will grant funding still be available when the wastewater systems need to be replaced? When discussing sustainable long-term funding, one considers how the needs of the present can be met without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. As you can see in the diagram for wastewater systems replacement, parcel owners of the future may be faced with overlapping long-term debt payments and might not have the benefit of government grants or robust capital reserves to assist with paying for their systems replacement. We have made a lot of progress with documenting and understanding the current state of our wastewater systems, but there's still more work to complete in order to establish a comprehensive asset management strategy. Today's presentation was intended to provide information on the current state of the wastewater assets. There's much more follow-up to do, including addressing improvement actions that require immediate attention. Some local service areas may not have sufficient operating reserve balances to carry out these actions. Multiple public engagement sessions are being considered to share what we have learned from developing the wastewater local service asset management plans. At the January Infrastructure Services Committee, staff intends to present sustainable funding strategies for the wastewater service areas. And periodic updates of the wastewater local service asset management plans will be done as new information becomes available. These updates may also be used as an opportunity to further align the plans with the strategies and tactics identified in the 2019 to 2023 strategic plan. This concludes my presentation on the current state of the wastewater infrastructure. Staff will welcome any questions or comments from the Corporate and Administrative Services Committee.
All right, Director Lee.
It's a curiosity question. In the Lee Bay plant, there's those big green barrels that stick out of the ground. What the heck are those things?
I could take you for a tour if you like. They're biofilters, so the sewage goes down into the plant into like a roughage tank. It gets the effluent gets put into the next tank. Just all the solids get taken out in the first tank, and the second tank it dumps the effluent onto the top of inside those tanks. And there's pucks basically in there, that like little webbed pucks, and it trickles down through all that media, and the growth grows on there, and that's how it treats the water. And then when it comes out the bottom, then we dispose it to the field.
Okay, I've got Director Hiltz, then Director Mann.
Okay. Thanks. Great report. I really appreciate all the, there's a lot of work in there, and it seems long overdue. So one of the things that you said is assets can last longer or shorter than what their theoretical projected life is. So I'm wondering about the contributions of the initial quality of the install versus the maintenance that happens afterwards. In terms of what your observations of the SCRD sites is the problems, those sites that last longer, is it because of quality build or better maintenance? I'm just, is there in the field, is there a way to kind of ascertain which is the larger contributing factor to an asset lasting longer or shorter?
I could probably answer all of the above. Some of our plants that we inherited were used plants that came in the 1970s, and we just replaced Square Bay. We managed with that plant for many years. The current construction is standard construction. You would see in any construction site, concrete tanks, that type of thing. And we do our best with maintaining them with the funds that we have.
Director Mann.
I noticed that the statistics on page 39 are not the same as the statistics later in the full report. For instance, on page 39, it says that Sunnyside was constructed in 1979 and taken over in 1983. And then on page 260, it says it was constructed in 1977 and taken over in 1979. Would it be fair to assume that the detailed report has more correct information?
Sorry, that was on page, first one was on page 39 and the other one was page,
260?
okay. Go ahead, Tina.
So if I could, the report on page 39, so that was last year's report. So I believe the comprehensive are the more accurate because we've actually gone back to our files and actually verified some of this. So at the time of 2018, we didn't have those, so they were estimated.
Thank you. Any other questions? We'll go to Director Lee, back to Director McMahon, and then Director Hill.
I'm curious, and I don't know if you can answer this, but I was trying to figure out why did we take those little plants on as an SCRD job?
I think they're looking for you, Remco.
Yeah, well, yeah.
What I can say is there has been a policy, there has been practice in the past by previous boards to take on facilities. There is no, especially the smaller one, there is no regulatory requirement for us to take them on. Under the Environmental Management Act, as a local government, we need to hold a permit for any any facilities with an effluent above 22.7. So for those ones, we need to own the permit, and our bylaw indicates that if we have to own the permit, then we also need to be in control of the operating and maintenance. That's not the case for the smaller facilities. For the smaller facilities, it's really the own discretion of the SRD's board at that time to take on those facilities.
Did you have a follow-up for that?
Can we give them back?
I think that would require to dissolve a service area, and I think that's a separate process that I'm not sure exactly how the process would take place. I think nothing is impossible.
Okay, Director McMahon, Director Hiltz.
But I think it will be a challenge, yes. Because to who do you give it back? Because we took them on from a developer, so I'm not sure if we can give it back to the developer now.
Okay. Director Lee, follow-up?
Yeah, I was curious whether just because there was multiple users of a plant we needed to do it, but I guess that isn't the case. I do see where it, because we have to do some of the larger ones, it would be good to have enough mass that we can employ knowledgeable people and attract good people. So I can see where it is good to have these. So I'm satisfied anyways, but I was curious.
Okay, Director McMahon, follow-up to that?
Yeah.
Director Tice.
Yeah, so for those facilities that are run by Stratas, there might be an opportunity for the Strata-run ones to actually, for the Strata to take things over. Is that something that could be a discussion with those facilities?
Before you answer, I'm going to add another piece to that. Why did we take them over in the first place, given they were Stratas? typically a strata is responsible for their own infrastructure.
That why did we took them on as in SRD? I think that's really a decision by the board at that point in time. I know that about 10 years ago there was more tendency. I think it was almost a philosophical discussion that the SRD, as a local government, would need to be responsible for wastewater treatment systems on the coast.
And so the question that Director Tighe had is, if it is a strata, can we require the strata to take them over and manage them?
We can explore the process and mechanisms for us to do so. What are if the board would like us to come back with a report on options, we can see what we can do there.
Director McMahon was next, and then Director Hiltz.
This is so much fun. Trying to persuade people to take their sewage back. I would argue that Sunnyside is both the oldest and the weirdest. One of these little plants, I brought this up at the APC last night, and somebody piped up with, do you think when they built the children's swing set, they knew it was on top of the septic field? But never mind. The Sunnyside system has 11 parcels, but only 8 users. So does that mean that 11 parcels are paying in, but only 8 are using it?
Currently, we have 2 sources of revenue, user fees and parcel taxes. Users of the system are required to pay the user fee amount. All parcels identified within the service area bylaw pay for the parcel tax.
So presumably some of the parcels either never hooked up or exited from the system. Do you happen to know what the situation is?
I believe those 3 parcels in Sunnyside that you're referring to are undeveloped land.
Okay, Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair. One is a follow-up to Director Lee, so I'm going to take 2 questions, if that's all right. So the follow-up was the discretion of the board to take on a facility or not. And where is that boundary, and what is the authority where the board doesn't have discretion to take on a treatment facility? Like, is it an EOCP rating, or what is the rating other than the 23 cubic meters? Where is the boundary of where the discretion starts and ends?
Thank you, Chair. Bylaw 320 outlines that the regional district will take over plants over 22.7, and it also discusses that the regional district reserves the right to acquire any other wastewater plants in the regional district. So the other ones are optional.
22.7 what?
Cubic meters a day.
And that was the follow-up. And then the other question is, I'm going to turn to the Langdale treatment facility, which I remember having a public meeting in 2007 talking about bringing this all together. And it seemed that in the report that there was some uncertainty about the joining of the systems. And my recollection in a previous report was about that the outfall and was for the regional district to take on that permit, which the regional district has the permit, that it was conditional on joining the facilities. So I'm wondering why there would be a chance that that's not going to happen. And maybe that's coming in a later report similar to Malibu, so I'm not sure if I'm ahead of the game here.
Yes, you're correct. It'll be coming forward in a future report.
Director Tighe, and then Director McMahon.
One of the big questions I have around the long-term funding options is if we're going to be establishing reserves and charging today's users to replace the systems 40 years down the line, is the opportunity to invest that money in a meaningful way. Otherwise, I would think that doing sort of either a lump sum or a debt repayment might actually be more advantageous at the time, because if you're creating a capital reserve but you're not investing it in a way that at least exceeds inflation, then what's the point? Just a question around what are the opportunities to actually create meaningful investments at this point in time?
I think there's two components there, and one we're not actually going to look at today, and that's how we fund these going forward, because that's what the report is going to bring forward later. But with regards to investments,
yeah, so the report in January is going to speak to, of course, we have to maintain the services, so user fees and parcel tax. So parcel tax is really the component of discussion about that future portion. So as far as the second piece of that, meaningful investment. So as local governments, the Community Charter and Local Government Act is prescriptive on to what we can invest in. So there is some discussion this year as part of UBCM for whether or not local governments can go to prudent investment. And so as you recall, we did receive some correspondence in anticipation of that resolution coming forward. So there is some work happening with a pooled advisory committee with the Municipal Finance Authority. Consequently, I'm one of the sitting members on that particular policy group, so there'll be more forthcoming on that. So again, local governments can only invest in things such as GICs, high interest savings account, things that are of secured nature. So we can't go invest in stocks or those types of things. We can invest in bonds and whatnot. So that is some of the things that local governments are looking at. But again, right now our portfolio does beat inflation, so it depends on how you work your portfolio too, but we are very restricted.
Director Hiltz, you had a question? Hey, well, we're going back and forth. It's up to you.
In terms of the maintenance, the plant that stands out to me is the Square Bay, which is listed as an EOCP level 4 plant, or level 3 plant, which requires someone on staff to have a level 3 ticket. You have to have the minimum. So it requires higher costs in personnel to get those extra levels. I'm wondering where the SCRD is meeting that standard of having someone at a level 3 certification, or is already there.
Thank you. The wastewater coordinator has a level 3 ticket, and our superintendent has a level 4. So we're certainly certified, and we're reviewing the flows in Square Bay to see if we can somehow get it down to a Class 2 plant.
District of Sechelt needs a level 4 operator.
I'd like a no poaching policy.
We need a baseball bat for those Tony Harding.
Okay, Director McNabb.
Okay. In a system like, say, Wood Creek Park, where does our responsibility end for, say, the collection system? Does it end at the property line of the private property, or does it go all the way up to the house, or how does that work?
Fortunately for us, for water and sewer, it ends at the property line. Gas goes to your house, TELUS and stuff go to your house, but we stop at the property line for both of our services in water and sewer.
Any other questions?
Oh, yeah, I've got.
Go ahead.
So, do our costs that we are charging, the user fees, do they reflect our total overhead on this? Like our administrative costs, our asset management costs, our public consultation costs, because we're going to be having a lot of public consultation on this, or are we eating this up under general administration?
Staff?
I'll take that one, Chair. So, no. So all the services borne by a service are covered by a service. I think that's one of the items that it's going to be brought forward as part of the rate review in January. So as you may recall, last year we started some work on this from a funding perspective for the user fees. So we recognized we needed more resources in those particular facilities. So more to come as far as what that's going to be for the 2020 and forthcoming budgets.
Okay, any others? Director McMahon?
Yeah, I was just wondering how many, two questions, but how many privately run systems are out there, like Strata-run systems, and whether we had ever, talked to the Stratas to see if there was any cost-sharing opportunities there.
I'm not sure how many plants are out there. I know of a few because they've approached us and they're under volume, so we've not continued on with the discussions. And I know that local contractors maintain them, but as far as I know, we haven't approached any stratas asking to cost share.
Okay, Director Ties and Director Kroll.
Okay. One of the big concerns I have is about the future developments that will want to go through this arrangement, and do we have any policy guidelines in place that we can hand to these people and say, well, these are the system requirements that need to be in place. These are this is what you're going to have to. So these are the system requirements, plus also this is the ongoing cost of this system and the upkeep of it. And before we enter in any negotiations with any new applicants, I think those guidelines need to be in place.
Staff?
Thank you for the question. It's a good one. We don't have, for our wastewater treatment plants, it has been a while since we were approached for us to take them on. If we were approached, we would have a discussion, and ultimately it will be a decision by the board of the day to confirm if they want to take it on or not. But we have technical specifications on what our treatment plants need to be, what we require from any treatment plant, our own or any new ones. We have those, and those are in part established and well known in the community.
Okay, and Director Kroll. Director Kroll, and then Director McMahon.
With reference to Director McMahon's question about the operational costs of the systems, in Attachment A, there's tables of the user fees and frontage fees, and for a 6-year period, they've pretty well remained static. My question is, would that suggest that what's been received have been covering the cost of operating these systems? Because from the earlier reply, it was suggested that the operational costs have been covered by the fees charged, which would, to me, suggest it's a system that's paying for itself, but I'm suspecting that's really not the case. And, most of the tables indicate that there's been a 6-year period with no increases, and I would suspect there's been maintenance and other costs that should have been captured in the user fees.
One of the lines here, before I turn to Tina, one of the lines in here says that the majority of these have been taken over in the last 15 years. So I'll turn over to Tina.
Yes, and I think there's a recognition as part of the earlier work in 2018 and earlier in 2019 was a recognition that, the amount of time spent from an operational standpoint was probably not sufficient to meet the operational requirements of the systems. So hence, that's part of the piece of this work. So it's kind of a loaded question. Yes, some of those functions actually generated some surpluses, but it doesn't mean that it should have generated surpluses if we were attending to it in the fashion that it needed to. So that's what we're developing, is what the operational and maintenance plans need to be. So how many times do we need to do inspections, et cetera.
And with these systems, the requirements are starting to be more rigorous as well, are they not?
And they're changing, and as GM Rosenboom pointed out, they are reviewing some because, again, you constantly have to be on top of these because as the environmental standards change, maybe we have some opportunities in some of these systems to maybe do that. But again, we need the qualified staff to do those reviews, so that's what staff are concentrating on now.
Director Lee, Director McMahon, and then
It's just a follow-up to Director Kroll's question. I believe that the time is the actual costs are put back on each individual plant, though, in the end of the day. There's no cross-subsidization. When you see a negative, what's happened is that they're eating up reserves that they had. I think that's correct.
Tina?
With the caveat that last year we actually identified that Regional Water was paying for some of the vehicles, so we've corrected that. So again, we'll continue to make improvements, but the general census is the service costs are funded by the service.
Okay, and Dr. McMahon.
In addition to environmental standards changing, the technology, I take it, is changing. So one of my questions was around Sunnyside. Presumably that was set up because they're fairly small lots in an area that doesn't perk. Are there more options for home septic systems now than there were back in 1979?
I believe so. Canoe Road is an example of a new technology that was installed in a small area. It's a container with coconut husks in it that works like a filter, and it goes into like a gravel bed rather than pipes. So that's an example where we did a workaround in a small area that when it was originally built, that size of drain field was acceptable, but not anymore. So that's the solution we came up with.
Okay, Director Hiltz.
Okay, I'm going to follow up on the theme is why does the regional district do this? And bylaw 320, the regional district has no discretion about assuming ownership of plants over that 22.7. Is that a provincial legislation still in practice that any system over 22.7 must be owned by a local government? There's nothing, so if the regional district wanted to change that bylaw and said, we will reserve the right to assume, that is totally within discretion, is that?
Staff?
The Environmental Management Act says that we have to take those plants on over 22.7 cubes as the permit holder.
Okay, so as the permit holder, so we would have to hold the permit, but we wouldn't necessarily have to take over the operation or the maintenance. We could have those systems actually do that as long as we managed what the quality of the effluent coming out would be. Is that correct?
Yes, it's correct that as a permit holder, we are responsible for the fact that the permit requirements are being met. We can entertain other arrangements to facilitate that. And for some of the plants where we currently don't have service area established, we are also in discussions with the current operators to explore that further.
Okay, I'm going to try and just bring us to the direction that we need to go to. So I'm going to have you go to page 42 in the package here. This is some of the work that staff need to do going forward. So right at the top of the page, it talks about binding agreements. And it indicates that several of the facilities lack legally binding access and ownership agreements or management agreements with third parties. So without them in place, we don't actually have full control over the facilities, but we're responsible for them. So staff are going to need to do some work around that. Next one is bylaws. So 3 facilities do not have service area bylaws. So staff are going to need to address those. And there will be public consultation, et cetera, with regards to that. Then operational budget implications. We need to look at service levels for the various facilities and the second paragraph says, shortage in qualified and skilled staff combined with an insufficient asset management plan are contributing to high amount of non-compliances with legislative requirements. So we're going to need to look at what is the service level we need, what kind of staffing do we need to have in place for that. It sounds like with the discussion here, I think it's bylaw 320 that we'll need to relook at to determine what is the criteria that determines whether or not, as a regional district, we want to take over these facilities or not. What are the guidelines about, yes, we're going to take this over, or no, we're not. We need to do some talking around that. Funding going forward, and that is coming forward later. So what happens with grants? Some facilities may be able to get grants and some may not. So how do we determine who pays for what? Do we have them save for it? Do we have them borrow for it? Is it the current users or is it the future users? Those are all conversations that are going to have to come back to us. Let's see, page 71. I noted something on page 71. Yes, okay, and this was just the 15 years and the change in the systems. One of the things that we talked about at our meeting yesterday was with regards to potential monthly payments. So if we look at some of the numbers that are in here, if we're looking at somebody spending $6,000 a year on their wastewater, is there a way that we can set it up so they do monthly payments rather than a yearly payment? Is there anything else that we need to address? The strata piece would be part of it as well. Tina?
Yeah, if I could suggest that some of these things are sort of, they're policy decisions, and so we should probably get some motions to these, some recommendations. So especially the one regarding researching whether or not in bylaw 320, which it currently states the regional district will take it, if there's any other mechanisms that staff could explore. So that would be a motion that I would suggest for staff to come back.
Okay, do you want me to go back over all of those things?
No, I think some
You've
of
got most of them
those
covered?
other ones, we're already working on them.
Okay.
But this is a policy change, so that would be something that would require board approval.
Okay, so we want staff to come back with options for looking at bylaw 320 for determining when and how and what criteria would be in place for the regional district to take over wastewater systems. Remco.
The question I have is, would the board also want us to explore what the process would be to give back to a third party?
Yes. Director Hiltz?
And I'm thinking about as a property owner, is it possible to remove myself out of a service? Someone might want to go on their own. Could that be wrapped up into that?
I think in the majority of the cases where it was a community system, it was that the individual lots themselves did not have sufficient land or parking capacity basically to be able to do that. So the only way to actually develop in those areas was to do a communal system of some sort. So they may want to remove themselves, but it may not actually be physically possible. So you want to say if they want to and it's physically possible, can they?
Yes.
Okay. So that would be in addition to this as well. Okay. Do we have a motion? Good luck.
Thank you, Chair. The Corporate Administrative Services Committee recommended that staff research in bylaw 320 if there are any other mechanisms the staff could explore for determining when and how and the criteria for the regional district to take over wastewater systems, and that to explore the process to return wastewater treatment plants to third parties, and also the possibilities of removing a lot from a service.
Okay, does that cover off what we're looking for? Okay. So I'll make that motion. Is there a seconder? Okay. Actually, I can't make the motion.
I'll make it then.
Okay, make the motion. Sorry, I'm not in the service. And then Director Hill, seconded? Okay, any other discussion? All those in favor, Director Lee, sorry, go ahead, question?
I'm not sure it's relevant to this, but I thought I'd put it out before that. A lot of the decisions that I believe the directors have made in Pender Harbor area on the septics and which one to take over are related to the desire to improve the quality of water in our harbor. And so it's a philosophy in Pender Harbor. I don't know how that would fit in here. I don't think I don't think the community would like to step backwards. I think they would like stricter enforcement by oversight. So that's just my thoughts on this.
Okay, not Director.
Yeah, those types of things would be addressed or articulated in OCP.
Okay, Director Kroll.
The permits for these, regardless of who's managing them, are held by the regional district. So I'm assuming, excuse me, if someone was to take back the operation and they didn't comply and there were fines, the regional district would be responsible for the cost of those fines.
Staff?
Thanks for the question. I think that depends on if the system has a permit under the Environmental Management Act or below 22.7 cubes a day if it's regulated by Vancouver Coastal Health. In that case, there is no permit. Then if the smaller plants would be taken over by a third party, then also the requirement to meet effluent quality guidelines is being taken over by the third party.
Director Toth.
Thank you. In looking at the motion here, I wonder if it's worth clarifying removing people from wastewater services. Because as it reads, it could open up a can of worms allowing people to opt out of, or look at mechanisms for opting out of any services, including water.
We can make that amendment. Thank you. Okay, any other comments? All right, all those in favor, and this is electoral areas only, all those in favor? Any opposed? Okay, if you don't vote, you're in favor. Okay. All right, motion is done. Anything else on these? Director Ties.
Yeah, I just want to kind of clarify. I have the fortunate position of only having to worry about one of these, and so the two questions that I want to preempt is one, what will be the cost if the strata takes it over? So that's, I think, addressed in this motion. And then the other one is how can we add more to the treatment plant so that it functions properly? And one of the questions I have is where is Gibson's Elementary with its septic and its treatment? And if they need to redo their field in the near future, maybe they can tie in. Or Roberts Creek Elementary, yeah. Sorry, why did I say Gibson's? I don't know. Roberts Creek Elementary. Yeah, we don't want to pipe that long. No, but yeah, Roberts Creek Elementary. Maybe just have a chat with school district as to where their septic, the age of their septic fields at, and I don't know if there's any possibilities to tie in, but that seems to me like it might work.
One other point that's come up around the table here is around communication. So going forward, we need to develop a communication plan around how we deal with getting the information out to the various homeowners. And another piece that we brought up was we need to also communicate with the realtors on the Sunshine Coast. Because if somebody's buying into one of these properties and there's a potential large outlay that's going to be required, all parties, homeowner, regional district could be, realtors, etc., could be liable should a homeowner buy a property, not be informed, and later find that they have this huge cost. So that's another market that we're going to need to ensure gets covered off with information. Okay, I don't know if we need a motion to that effect. I think we'll just make it happen. Okay, thanks. Yeah, we have an in. Okay. Anything else on wastewater? Are we done with wastewater today? Looks like we can move on. Awesome. Thank you for the report. Thank you for all the information. Appreciate it. Moving. Take a break?
Yes.
Okay, break. All right, I think we're moving on to Annex C. Starts on page 313. And we've already received the report. And Tina, are you talking to this one? This is the Information Technology Equipment Financing Loan Application. Page 313.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So included in this particular report are two components. The first component is to meet our requirements for the Municipal Finance Authority to fund the 2019 short-term debt requirements for our capital equipment for IT purchases for 2019. So there is a resolution there. The second piece here is a process improvement that staff have identified for 2020 and ongoing. So a few years back, a preliminary asset management plan was presented to the board. We had ongoing increases for our IT system requirements, both from a capital and from sort of software requirements ongoing. So $50,000 is funded or increased per year. But there's always a component of debt funding for that. So really what happens is we continually put ourselves in a hole, for lack of a better term. So what we're doing is we're trying to shift the funding from support services versus debt funding, so we don't actually have interest there. So that's the recommendation of staff. Another piece that I wanted to add is in reviewing the particular recommendation on page 313 of the agenda, staff have modified the recommendation slightly, so there's some new wording that the recording secretary can read out that might be a little clearer.
Sorry. All right, so two pieces. One is we need to take care of the borrowing for 2019. So that's the one. Tickle in my throat. And the second part is we're looking at eliminating the annual borrowing going forward over the next few years and using reserves that we have instead to pay back the borrowing. Okay.
So a combination of reserves as well as increase in support service costs.
Okay, Director Lee.
And the intent would be that after the 5-year expected life cycle of it, the reserves would be back up to their big thing again?
Yeah, we would eventually kind of do this really visually. That's the best way to articulate it. No, people listening cannot see that. But yes, we would have some balancing, and again, we would avoid the debt servicing costs in the future. So it'll take some time for us to catch up to that, but that is the intent.
Director McMahon?
Can we hear the revised recommendations?
Yes. Do you want to read them out, or do you want me to read them out? Okay, so the second one's as it is, right? And that the loan of up to $70,000 for a term of 3 years be requested. That one's the same. But the next one, we've split it up a bit. So it reads, and that the 2020 to 2024 financial plan and IT base budget be amended to eliminate annual debt financing for information technology hardware, and that annual capital funding be maintained by utilizing capital reserves on an interim and as-needed basis until such time as existing loans have expired and funding for debt servicing can be reallocated. Make sense? All right. Would someone like to make those recommendations? Moved and seconded. Any other questions? All those in favor? Thank you. So I'll move on to Seashell Library apportionment options. And first, we were handed another sheet today, or calculations. I'd like to receive those. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. And then, Tina, did you want to speak to this or not?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this particular report comes after the discussion that happened at the last Corporate Services meeting. And so subsequent to that, correspondent and the motions were sent to both the District of Sechelt as well as the Sechelt Indian Government District. So I understand this item has gone to the District of Sechelt, so there's some further follow-up to that piece. However, we haven't received any information from the Sechelt Indian Government Districts as of yet, so again, we have no input as far as any of these calculations for them is concerned. So.
Okay, so District of Sechelt, it did come before our council, and the recommendations that came forward, the first one with regards to starting the negotiations for the Memorandum of Understanding was passed as written. The recommendation 3 with regards to library funding allocation, we passed it indicating that we would request that the electoral area A use 100% of their population rather than 33%. So that would be coming back, well, it would be part of the conversation in the MOU agreement. With regards to the Sechelt Indian Government District, we do know that one of their staff members is out sick, and so we're just looking to facilitate those conversations to make that happen. Any comments, questions, concerns? Director Ties.
Yeah, so my question is what are the chances we're going to get an answer out of the SIGD in time? That is probably the biggest question I have. I don't know if anybody here has that answer, but should we make a contingency that what happens if we don't?
I don't know what our option is if we don't. Staff?
So essentially we have until round 2 budget, which would be February 10th and 11th, for us to have a final, from the regional district standpoint, some recommendations as far as what the regional district funders are committed to funding for 2020 towards the library. So we would have to do that in anticipation of our financial plan bylaw. So depending on how we receive or come to an agreement as far as the funding apportionment for the actual agreement with the library. So there's those 2 pieces. One is for the adoption of the budget, and the other piece is for the agreement. So I think we'll turn our attention and focus to ensure that we do get some sort of communication, so we can work on that collectively to try to get that communication within nation.
So given the where Sechelt has landed on this and the motion that was here, how do you anticipate resolving that piece?
So I believe there was a motion, and so we haven't formally received that here at the regional district. So there's not. So we could, if we had that would form the SCRD and the District of Sechelt, so we would just be waiting for the 3rd piece. So if there is some information from the District of Sechelt, we haven't formally received that as correspondence. If you want to share that with us, I know it was in the newspapers, but...
Well, I don't think it hasn't come back and been... It was passed, but it has to come back and be ratified at the next meeting, right? So, and then it would come forward. Okay. And then I understand that there was some communication around this.
Yeah, so, I mean, we haven't done a further analysis, but we do have staff who've reviewed it. There are some nuances with regional districts. So in the case of Area B, as an example, Area B islands do not participate in the library service. So there are some variations here. So I think from staff's perspective, it's mainly the main philosophical portion. How we arrive at these figures would be verified, but for us, it's more of what the District of Sechelles position is as far as what their apportionment would be, and then the rest would kind of fall out. Because, of course, we're dealing with historical assessment values right now, so regardless, these will all change right up until April 1st.
So not going anywhere close to telling Director Lee what he's supposed to do. But I just want to explore that option that if the spending limit were to be exceeded, what is involved in actually having to alter that bylaw, and what time frames are we looking at?
Something would have to be done before December 31st. And so from a time frame perspective, I don't know if we would have the time to do that for 2020, because we have to go through the ministry.
So in other words, to change the amount in the service funding, basically bylaw for the libraries, does it have to go to AAP again? No?
So without getting into the legislative piece, there is regulations that if it's within a certain percentage, that it doesn't have to go back out to public consultation, but it is the discretion of the Inspector of Municipalities. So we would have to consult with the ministry as far as what the impacts would be. Because the service was just recently established as well, they may consider, because there's sort of this time frame, if it's within 5 years, and we are within that time frame. So it depends how material the change is. I'm not going to hazard a guess as to what we're going to be advised until we actually seek that direction from them.
Any questions or comments? Director Hiltz.
I've been down at the other end and haven't been weighing in onto this, but I'm really interested to understand the 33% in a little more substantive method of where that came from, why it exists, when was it last reviewed, these kind of stuff. I'm interested in knowing the philosophical reasons of why 33% is there. Is on the other end, from Area F's perspective, there is a huge contribution from the islands that go to libraries, and they're an extra ferry away, and it's seen as more of a regional service or a sub-regional service. So I'm wondering specifically from the Area A perspective of why 33%.
I'll tell you where the 33% came from, because it wasn't a philosophical question at all. It was looking at a dollar value and what percentage would actually give us that dollar value. That's where the 33% came from. Director Lee.
This subject is probably 15 years old that I'm aware of. All the previous directors have struggled with it. It's a philosophical problem that relates to a lot of our services. I listed some of them: garbage water, pools, ice rinks, parks, schools, wastewater. And we've had protracted discussions and very heated discussions on how we fund them. And you'll note they're all different. The libraries themselves were in that same category, only they could never get agreement. And so to put peace in the world, they went with a combination of library cards and visits on a study they did back in 2013. And it worked out somewhere between 4 and 5%. And that's what we used for the last 5-year settlement. Didn't make it a regional function, by the way. And that was the resolution of it. So that's we converted at the last minute meeting, we converted that amount, 5%, to 33%. I don't know why, maybe to make a nice tidy table. There was no other logic. I tried to go back and figure out if it was items loaned, books that were come out versus books that were in the reading room. There's not enough data. I can't find any other way of slicing and dicing it. So in the fact there is no more data available that I could find, until something changes, I got to stick with that 5%, unless we want to go through the whole thing again. Mini service review, something like that. I'm okay with that. I'm willing to do that. We figured out how to do it. There's a few other bigger ones I'm interested in. So, to be honest, my take on it is we have a lot of higher priority things to look at, and things that our staff needs to look at, we need to look at, we need to think about. So I was strictly okay with upping it to the top end, 5%, and settle peace in the world and go forward. And that's my view on it. So that's where I am. I can't find any reason to change my position, mostly because my predecessors have looked at it and went through all this. I'm not sure I want to face it again. And I don't think it's important enough for us to waste our time on it, or on any of the other ones. I think we should just need to go forward and do what we're focusing on. That's my take on it. If there's some other solution that the board is willing to consider, like forming a study group and coming back with some recommendations for me, I'm all in. Because if I had more data and I could justify it to the people, then I'm all in. I just can't find a way to justify moving. So I do have a question, though. The apportionment that Tina, that you used, was that based on the total tax collected with the business removed divided by the population?
No, we did not remove any property class out of the assessment figures.
Yeah, and I was interested in more than the property class. I was thinking of the actual tax revenue collected, because the property classes are multiplied by various figures.
I'm not sure if I understand the question.
We collect a certain amount of taxes from residents in hard dollars. We collect a certain amount of taxes from all the business categories in hard dollars. If we're going to go by population and contribution by person, we have to take the business out of it.
Go ahead.
That's not currently how the bylaw is written. And so that's not how the cost is recovered. So essentially, if you agree to an amount, essentially that on an annual basis will change based on the apportionment changes throughout the year. So if you have more businesses, or in the case of some of the other areas, you have more utilities, that's why, for instance, some of the apportionment in some of those areas change quite drastically. So in the case of, it'll change annually. So you can't remove a property class out of there, so it'll stay static, so that the amount recovered will stay the same. How it's apportioned to the various property classes will change from year to year.
So if you look at page 317 with the table, right, that's the table you're looking at.
Yes.
Okay, so it's 33% of the total population in Area A. Sorry, let everybody get there. Page 317. 317? So Area A looks at 33% of the population of 2624 is 866 people. Right? Area B is 100%, District C shot 100, SIGD in this table is 50%, and Area D 50%. So the total that will be covered is 15854. So if you took 866 over 15854, that's 5.46%. That's it. Okay, go ahead.
Sorry, no, that wasn't my question. My question's on page 318 and the residential tax rate per 100,000.
So how did you calculate the tax rate?
Yes.
Okay, on that page.
I asked it in reverse, but that's what I wanted to know.
So essentially, it's using the 2019 assessments and what the apportionment base is based on our statutory reports. So what each of the property classes are for that particular function. So that particular rate, yes, it would be 2.45 the rate for the businesses. And in the case of Area A, so it would be $2.11 per 100,000 for the residential class. So it takes all of those things into account. But again, for 2020, that rate will change once we get the new assessments. Just by nature, if we change no dollars at all, that particular dollar amount might change because of the assessment values.
So then, just so I understand my reverse question answer, that figure is the taxes collected from the residential sector divided by the population?
The population in this case is irrelevant. The population just generates the amount that you're going to collect, meaning you need X amount of dollars in order to recover. How that's recovered amongst the residential class, the utility class, the business class, would change from year to year, just based on the various apportionment to that. And in the case of Area A, understanding it's mostly residential, but that could change.
So we're looking at the $45,119 for 2020. Based on 2019 assessment, the residential tax rate would be 2.11 per 100,000. That will change once we get the assessment for 2020, either up or down depending on assessment values. Further follow-up? Director Lee, did you have anything else, or should we move on? I'll let you sit with that for a bit.
Sorry, I'm particularly dense today because I don't quite understand. I'm, of course, looking at option 3 that Tina presented. That's what started my thinking. That's on page 319. And so that 2019 reversed roll converted total is the total tax collected from the residents in Area A. Okay.
Are you looking at the $75,683, that one?
Yeah, 213,452,590.
Okay.
Okay.
Tina?
And again, to clarify, that will change because that's just using the 2019 values. So for the purposes of the agreement, we would want to come to some sort of at least percentage allocation, because to change, it would change from year to year. And so, I mean, that's an option. We could always bring that back, but it would change what everybody pays. We'd have to do the calculation annually, but essentially we'd have to come to an amount that you're going to recover from the electorate, from the local service area. That's essentially what this is. This gives a snapshot for 2019. If you use this methodology of 33%, this is what the approximate tax rate would be for the residential rates. It's not to say you're not going to collect from the businesses. It's that this is what it would be for the residents.
That was the answer to my reverse question at the first. I should have asked it this way.
Okay,
Thank
so
you.
you've got your answer now?
Yes.
Perfect. Director Ties and then Director Toth.
Well, going back to the philosophical, so everybody pays into schools, and that's because everybody sees the value in, I guess, a public education and a school system. And nobody debates that we should all be paying into schools, whether we have children that are in the school right now or not. I personally value libraries just as highly, and that everybody should be paying into libraries. They are a big equalizer amongst the social classes. If you're out of school, it is the one way that people that don't have the income to get to computers and to get to the resources needed to get ahead in life have access. And it is one of the big foundations of a working democracy is that everybody has those means to get themselves access to all that information. By doing apportionment, for at different rates, that means that it implies that a certain amount of the population of those people essentially don't value libraries at all. And I very much doubt that's the case in Pender Harbor, that 66% of the population don't value libraries. So fundamentally, I think that we should all be paying for libraries, and we should all be paying whatever our, by population or by assessment or whatever it is. But that's sort of my philosophical viewpoint on the whole matter. I don't know if everybody shares that, but I think libraries are incredibly important to our democracy, and I think that everybody should be paying for them.
Okay, I've got Director Toth, and then Hiltz, and then Pratt, and then Lee.
But I think Tina wants to talk at some point here too. I'm going to ask just a quick question, and you can answer that one at the same time. Where I keep getting hung up, and maybe this was adding to Director Lee's issues with the tables, the green boxes that are in the agenda that specifically say residential tax rate per 100,000, there are other columns there. They're just not presented with this table. There is a commercial, utilities, etc. They're not zero. And I kept getting hung up on this because this is what I'm seeing on the agenda. So, yeah.
Okay. Tina, did you want to weigh in before these all come in?
I know we haven't spent much time on taxation from a regional district standpoint. One of the nuances with regional districts is that there are, because the province sets forth or collects our taxes, one of the things to note is the differences. School taxes, for instance, in the utility class, they do get an exemption. And so I know that's very important for the regional district here because we have so many utilities in some of our various areas. So that wouldn't be the case. So, the utilities don't pay for school taxes, but they do pay for library services. So that's sort of an important nuance to understand in the case of the various areas and how these various services are recovered. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Thank you. So we have Director Hiltz, then Pratt, and then Lee, and then McMahon.
Thank you. With respect to Director Lee, I can understand a 15-year history of not wanting to kind of delve into it. And for me, the reason why I want to delve into it, I guess, is because of the strategic plan. Number 3, regional collaboration partnerships. This board is trying to, I think, address these perceived inequalities of the past and kind of deal with it. So for me, it's worth the investment of some time so far. The aspect of data, not enough data to make the decisions and the apportionment. So if there's not enough data, you have to start to look for assumptions and go to sometimes a superior or alternative surrogate data source. And for me, the alternative surrogate data source was library services funding. And based on library services, they say that the whole Sunshine Coast is 100% served by library services. The apportionment, so in some ways I'm wondering if the Roberts Creek is apportioned 50% grant to Seashell, 50% to Gibsons. So if this 33% comes in, will that in turn roll into the library services? And they will also consider Area A to be a 33% library services. Like, I'm wondering if they haven't quite caught up with the apportionment that we're doing here. So my question is, why does library service consider Area A 100% serviced? That would be a question in terms of providing some data. If we don't have the data, why do they, as an organization, say that it's 100% serviced? So that's my question. If we can't provide the data on our own, can we just ask that question? That might be a motion to have why library services considers Area A 100% library service. And that might supply the data to help understand and be able to present this information to the residents of the area of why someone else, the province, thinks that you receive library services. So there seems to be a disconnect between what the people think and what the province thinks, and the province kicks in a certain amount of funding. So that's where I'm kind of going is, can we get some more data specifically from library services on why it's 100% serviced? So that's kind of where I'm weighing in on that.
Did you want to weigh in on that, Tina?
Yeah, so I think, is it 100% service from the ministry, from the province side? So in the case of Area A, it isn't.
The tables that I have, and it says 100% serviced. In the operating grant, that Area A grant is 100% population of 2,624 for 7,000. That's the data that's coming from library services. So I'm guessing, is that accurate? So that's a question.
We have to check.
Have to check.
Yeah.
Would you like to make a motion to that effect?
I'd sure love to make a motion to check some data, yeah, with library services.
Okay.
Specific to Area A.
Okay. Seconded.
I would note that that's a permanent population of Pender. It's not actually the number of people that live there full and part-time. It's about 2/3 higher.
Okay, so I have, before we vote on this, I think there's some other comments here that may pertain. We've got Director Pratt, and then, or did you want to deal with this first? And then?
I think it's best to deal with this first because it's a different part, and my comments aren't directly related to this, so I wouldn't feel right speaking on the motion.
All right, is there anybody else who would like to speak to the motion? Director McMahon.
I'm wondering if your question is whether the province has a policy on what they consider to be served by libraries? Okay.
And how would that pertain to the motion that's on the floor? Could we read the motion that's on the floor?
Thank you, Chair. That staff contact the libraries branch of the provincial government to confirm the percentage served for Area A.
Yeah, it says, it's based on the 26 census. It's with reference to the grant, right? Because they use the population served as a per capita grant rate to come up with a sub-grant amount. So they use that 2,624 as a 2016 census as the baseline, which is 100% of the area, based on census data, not on the number of people who are there, the number of people who go into the library. But that's, so to me, Census Canada is the most superior data that we have in terms of populations.
Okay, and Director Ties to the motion, and then Director Lee to the motion.
Yeah, I'm wondering if we should amend that and ask the libraries branch what the criteria is for setting the percentage allocation, because that's ultimately what we want to know, rather than whether they're accurate or how if their numbers are accurate. They're just going to say yes, they're accurate, and we're none the wiser. So I think we should amend it to the criteria that they use to ascertain the apportionment.
Okay, so we'll have the motion read back, and then you could potentially put forward an amendment.
Okay.
So let's see what it says now.
Thank you, Chair. It recommended that the percentage of population served by the provincial libraries branch be confirmed for Area A.
Okay, and you want to have something with regards to criteria for determining population?
And maybe we'll just add an and that the library services branch shares their criteria for apportionment with us, or something like that. For population served, yeah.
Okay, that's an amendment, first of all.
I could answer the question where the population come from. It come from the 2016 census.
Yeah.
I don't know how they calculate served, and I did ask the question the last time we talked about it, but I guess I didn't make a motion.
Okay, I think
so
that's
I definitely am interested in knowing how they decide who's served by a library.
Right. So that's the amendment is actually adding on to find out the criteria to determine the population served, which I think is addressing what you're asking.
No, I'm asking a different question.
Okay.
How did they decide Thornbury wasn't served? You could call it that way if you want.
Okay.
Because they must have some way of deciding what areas are served. They must have a criteria. I don't know what it is.
That's what I was trying to.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's hear the amendment that was put forward. It hasn't been seconded yet, but let's hear the amendment and see if it addresses what you're looking to do. I think we're trying to get to the same place. We just don't know if the motion actually reflects what we want at this point. So the and that portion, Tara.
Thank you, Chair. And that the criteria for population served for libraries be confirmed through the libraries branch.
Does that cover it off? Okay, so what do we want it to say instead? I think you both want the same thing.
They'll just come back and say that figure is good.
But we're asking for the criteria. What is the criteria that determines the population served? That's what the and that is. And that they identify the criteria used to determine the population served.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. All right. Seconded? Okay. Would anybody like to speak to the amendment? Director Hiltz.
Yeah, I'm definitely supportive of the amendment. The first part gets the data. The second part is why the data is the way the data is.
Anybody else to the amendment? And who is voting on this one? This would be A, B, D, C Schelt, and SIGD. All right. So you could be in favor, but you can't vote on it.
I will speak in favor.
Perfect. All right. Anybody else to the amendment? So all those in favor of the amendment? Thank you. Okay, so now we have an amended motion on the floor, and that is that we confirm the population that they use in their calculations and provide us with the criteria used to come up with that population served. Anybody else to the motion on the floor? All those in favor? Thank you. All right, so now I have back to the bigger conversation, and I have Director Pratt, Director Lee, and Director McMahon.
So there's just wanted to address a few comments, being that I do have a very strong connection to Pender Harbour and Egmont, having lived there for a number of years, raised my children there, and attended schools. So there is, I fully believe in public libraries as being an equalizer as well. I think when we're looking at the Pender Harbour example, though, it's I think you need to liken it more to an island than you need to as actually being a part of that coast. There is an incredible distance that creates isolation for the community. And in that, they become a community amongst themselves. They don't have transportation up there. They're not highly connected to Sechelt. And it doesn't matter what age you are, whether or not you're a young family or an older family, you stay within the community. So, I mean, if you, when you're on the southern part of the coast, we're used to going back and forth all the time. Pender Harbour, there's more of a preference to stay within the community of Pender Harbour. So there isn't as much use of the library. There is some, I know there is, because I know across the population everyone does, but it's not like, for example, Gambier and Keats are more connected to Gibsons. Pender Harbour is connected to Sechelt, but they don't need to go down to Sechelt. They can live completely within their own community. And I know when I was living up there in Lees Bay or Garden Bay, it might be months before we went down to Sechelt unless there was another reason to go down to. My kids didn't have library cards at the Sechelt Library until, grade 4, grade 5, grade 6-ish. There was just not, because we didn't go down, and we still, even so, they weren't using it often. They were using the school libraries, or we were using books other ways, or we were going to the reading center that is up there. Yes, the reading center is supported by the Sechelt Public Library, but it's more highly supported by the volunteers and the donations within the community than it is by the Sechelt Library. So there is a very different cultural piece to how Pender Harbour sees themselves within our community and with the usage of the Sechelt Library. And there are some very big supporters of the Sechelt Library living within the Pender Harbour community, but I think we need to look at it as a one-off and get this other data to be able to make the case. And I think that's part of the issue, because it's when you look at it as a community as a whole, it's a very separate area. I mean, Elphinstone, West Howe Sound, you're very connected with Gibsons. Half Moon Bay, we're very connected with Sechelt. So to me, those are, and Roberts Creek is split down the middle. Pender Harbour is a different case. To me, it is a different case. So those are my thoughts.
Okay, I have Director Lee, McMahon, and then Ties.
Let me put my glasses on. Director Ties made a couple of points, and I have to say I do agree with his points. And I believe we value libraries quite highly in Pender, and probably as much as anybody does. Not everybody has the means to get there. There's no public transportation. Our homeless people don't have cars. Our kids do not travel outside of school hours much. Occasionally. They sure definitely wouldn't drop down during the week to the library. To make up for that, we have a bunch of means that it's done by. There's the Pender Harbour Reading Room. We know what they are, book loan summer reading programs. There's a community school, tax and form filing, computers hooked to the internet, computer skills training, children's programs. There's the seniors initiatives. There's senior programs, and they're socializing, taking care under the season, the seniors programs. it probably roughly gives, by the combination of the access we do have to the Sechelt Library and the support we get on book loans, and the supplementary that are local, they probably get the same access, but in a different manner. So that's my problem. How do you quantify that? And how do you put it into your thinking when you do? I put it a different way. How many people would visit the Pender Harbor Library if Sechelt didn't have one? Think about it from that point of view when you're talking about it. I got incomplete stats. The first one was population by serviced area. How do you do it? What's the criteria? That was the first one, so I was quite happy to see that proposal. The people that use each service provided, their home service area, and I'm thinking about the social services that the government has mandated that local government provides, when in fact I believe it's a provincial government thing that should be happening. But they put it into the library, all those things I just talked about. And I'd like to know the cost per person per service provided by the agency providing it. If we had those kind of things, we could look at it objectively and make a decision. I could look at it objectively and make a decision. Without it, I can't make a decision. And so the real problem is the lack of applicable stats, which would allow a policy based on hard stats. I looked at the school taxes, but they in fact are allocated back by person, not by who put the money in. That's how I understand it. Lori could probably correct me if I got it wrong, but that's the way I understand it's done. And the areas that have large businesses contributing to taxes, each person is paying less for the library in those areas, considerably less in some areas. Pender Harbor is on the wrong end of that formula. We don't have very many businesses. And I don't see that factored into the cost per person for libraries. So all of that stuff's missing for me. And until it is, I'm not ready to jump. I would argue it's kind of like ice rinks. You guys look after them, and it's nice that we can use them. Not a good thing, but that's an historical thing. That's what's happened to solve that problem of access to services. So I don't know what to do, but when you don't know what to do, it's best not to jump.
Okay, I have Director McMahon and then Director Ties.
Okay, I've been watching various boards wrestle with this rabbit hole for years. I think Tina's probably got more experience with it than I do, but I've certainly watched this for almost 15 years. And I agree with actually Director Lee that it can be a terrible time sink relative to other priorities that we have. So it would be awfully nice to just make a decision, even if it's the wrong decision, and move on with it. I will, point out that, no, I won't point out. I'm not going down that hole. What part of what we're talking about here is the service level. We have services that we consider essential, like water, and then we have services that are kind of optional, like maybe ice rinks. And I think part of the philosophical discussion here is this an essential service? And for services that are essential, I think we should just all suck it up and pay in. I mean, Area E pays for ports, and we don't have any. But we recognize the importance of ports to the residents of the islands. So we're participating. I can only imagine what the debates at the school board would look like if you had to argue about who is funding which school. I mean, it would be terrible. Like, how many students are going to this school and that school, and what if they change schools? Should we pay for them? And let's not go there. I think it is a horrible rabbit hole, and we should just, as far as possible, move on. It's easy for me to say. I don't have to vote on this.
Okay, Director Ties.
So, yeah, I acknowledge the comments that have been coming out here by Director Lee and Director Pratt, and I think the ultimate thing that we're discussing here is the difference between usefulness and value. How much are we using the library, and how much are we actually valuing the library as an institution and as an entity? And that's, I think, where my disconnect is with the whole thing. I personally don't use the library very much, but I'm happy to pay for it. And yes, distance is certainly a factor, but I would argue that I don't know if there's such a thing that we can have a poll up in Pender Harbor and saying, how do you value libraries, and are you willing to pay for them? Those are kind of the questions that I'd like answered in order to move forward on this.
Councillor McLean actually looked up the results of the AEP that happened in Area A when the service was established, and there were actually no responses back from residents. Like, nobody said, don't fund this. So one of the questions that Director Lee came out with was, what % of funding of their taxes are by residential owners versus business? Because he said they don't have much business. So I know Sechelt comparatively doesn't have much business either. Our property taxes are, 96% residential? 86 to 96%? 85%. Depends what you're looking at, right? Yeah, 85%. So we don't have a lot either. But do you know percentage of taxes in Area A that are, okay?
91% residential in 2019.
Okay, so you're at 91, we're at 85. So I mean, we're all, I don't know what the others are, but 98? Okay.
Area B is lower just because they've got the utility portion. That's quite substantial.
Okay. All right, so I think we're waiting for some more information before this, and we need the motion that comes from Sechelt. I've requested it be sent over. So there's nothing at this point.
No, and I think that we have budget deliberations on December the 4th, so the library will be presenting their budget. So at this particular time, we can, I guess staff are seeking if there's anything further that is required. The agenda goes out in the next day, so it'd be difficult for us to prepare anything. So understanding that it would probably most likely be a receipt for information with further information to come between round 1 and 2.
Director Lee?
Clarification on the process to up Area A's maximum allowable under their bylaw. Does that require an AAP?
Yeah, I think that I'm not going to say that we need a motion right now, just because the precursor review that staff did, the question was whether or not the $67,000 was the floor versus the ceiling. And we reread the bylaw, and it looks like it was the floor at the time. So there is some elasticity there. What the ceiling is currently, we would have to review, because again, it was based on that particular, when we were establishing the service, that amount was was prescribed. So we don't know whether or not it needs to be done, so we can contemplate that in any subsequent report.
She indicated that 67,000 is not the ceiling, according to the way the bylaw is written, so that there is some leeway in there and may not require going back and raising it at this point, depending on what the funding looks like. So, yeah, go ahead.
Can you tell us what the ceiling is?
The ceiling changes annually for every service that's recovered through assessments. So it's that last year, I think it was that $85,000, but it would change this year again. So that's always what we have to keep in mind, is if we're getting close, sometimes we raise it. So if, it's up to you. If you want to have a motion to say what the process is to do this, then we can do that. But again, cognizant that there's a lot of motions being shot staff's way for work, so I'm just cognizant that, we don't have an unlimited time to do these things.
Director Lee, how did you want to address that?
I believe for our purposes that 2019 was around 85,000, and that'll give us some guidelines on what we're up to.
Okay, so you don't need anything further at this point then?
No, it gives me...
Perfect. Thank you. All right, and the motion that comes from CSHOT, where should it go?
Through the normal correspondence channels. So if that was received, that would be placed on a subsequent agenda.
Who should it be sent to?
To the chair.
Okay. Okay, thank you. All right. Anything else? Director Lee?
Sorry, just one last question. Do we have a process if we wanted to poll the people in Area A and ask the question on this very subject? I don't know what the original question was on the AAP, so I'd have to look that up as well. But.
So I think the question would be whether or not the area director would want to do a survey to their residents. So the alternate approval process is in the negative versus the affirmative. So you're asking a different question. You'd probably be asking a different question. And I think that we could, but we just need a motion to that effect, that if the area director wants staff to create some sort of communication with, we could do a survey online like we've done for other initiatives regionally. So.
It's your decision. I mean, I think. Well, I understand you want to do what your residents want, and you're unclear as to what their wishes are at this point, and you don't want to move forward with something you don't think they'll agree with. So you want to find out what they think. So, an online survey is fairly easy to put together.
I'm just throwing out a suggestion.
Yeah.
A values-based one.
There may be some other methods so we can work with the area director on that.
Okay. Do you want a motion to that effect? Okay. That staff work with the director from Area A to solicit feedback from his community with regards to library funding for library services. And do you want that on today's agenda? The board's agenda for today?
Yeah, let's get on with it.
Okay, so would you like to make that motion that I just put forward?
Yeah, whatever that was.
Okay, I'll second it. Okay. Any discussion on that? All those in favor? Thank you. I think, are we done on the library? Director Hills.
I wanted to respond to Director Lee's question about how to make decisions about value of service versus property taxes paid. And I'll speak for myself. And first of all, I start with the question, would I want to live anywhere other than on the Sunshine Coast? That's where I start. Right? If I say yes to that, then I'm going to figure out how to make it work. If I say no, I'm going to leave. So that's where I start. And I think of it as a basket of service. I don't think as just one service. I receive a basket of services. Islands get like 25 services in their basket. Different people get different things in their basket. But overall, I'm happy with the basket that I'm leaving with, and I'm happy with what I'm paying for. And are there free riders on the systems? There's definitely free riders on the system. If Pender Harbor people are using the recreation facilities, they're free riders. Free riders are part of providing public services. So, and the other part of my decisions, I always go to my oath of office, and I make decisions for the Sunshine Coast as a whole. And there are decisions that I'm making now and will make in the future that there are individuals in my area that are not going to be happy with. But composting one just springs to mind. But as a whole, I believe it is the best decision for the regional district as a whole. So that's kind of how when I get down to how much do I pay for the street light that I'm driving past on Lockyer Road at night, how much am I paying for that? I don't think about that. I think about as a whole, do I want to live here? Am I satisfied with it? And that's where I start. And so, yeah, there are things that are going to make people unhappy, but as a whole, that's where I start with. Do I want to live here? And is it in the best interest of the regional district as a whole? So that's how I respond to those kinds of questions.
All right. Okay, we'll go to Director McMahon, Director Lee, and then we're going to cut off library because point of order. Okay, go ahead.
I'm not sure if Director Hiltz was addressing the chair or me.
Yeah, it was.
He was philosophizing.
Yeah, we were talking about
whatever.
How we make our decisions, and that's, I can only speak for myself, so I'm speaking through myself, I guess, something like that.
Okay, Director McMahon, thank you.
And I like what he said, and it will make a great further discussion over lunch, but we also need to think about our values as a board. That's another thing that we bring to these discussions.
Director Lee.
Would it be possible for Pender Harbor to establish its own library and pay for it?
Staff?
So that's not, like a municipal library service? I don't know. Okay. Because the ministry is the one who, so Director McMahon may have some more information.
Probably not. Okay. The Sechelt and Gibson's libraries are both public library associations, which the province is not creating anymore. And so it would have to be municipal, for which you would need to be a municipality. However, that being said, you would have to double check with probably the libraries branch in Victoria.
Director Lee?
I'd like to make a motion that staff check on that and inform me as to whether that's possible or not.
So it's whether or not Pender Harbor could establish its own library service?
Yes.
Okay. Not a library service, a library with a with a service to fund it.
A library with a service area, yes.
Thank you.
Half Moon Bay might want to join me.
All right. Given this is one area, everyone will vote on this. So is there a seconder, first of all, for your motion?
I will second the motion.
Okay. Any discussion? Director Hiltz.
How much detail are you looking for? Like a really high-level overview of legislative? I'm wondering about the staff time, right? The motions that we're putting on them, how much would you expect staff to kind of put into it? That's kind of where I'm trying to figure.
10 minutes for a phone call. It's just a philosophical question.
So in other words, can it be done or not? not how it happens, everything else. Yeah, none of that. Just can it be done? Okay. All those in favor? Any opposed? Would you like that recorded? No. Okay. Yes, you're voting on that. You're opposed? Okay. Would you like that recorded? Okay. All right, we're going to move on. Annex E, frequency of variance reports. So this is in response to a request actually from the board. We were saying that staff are spending a lot of time doing these reports, and we didn't know whether or not the reports that were given were actually required in the frequency that we were getting them. And Tina, do you want to speak to it?
I think the report articulates sort of where staff's position is. I think that there's an element of transparency that I think is important for us to disclose this information. One of the process improvements we did identify, though, is those individual reports for those functions. We just roll them in. Those are historical pieces that I'm not sure are relevant anymore. And regardless, if there's any anomalies, we would bring it to the board's attention. Regardless of a timing, we wouldn't wait necessarily till those reports, but I think it's important from disclosure of an entity of our size that we do these on a regular basis.
Any questions? Director McMahon.
I'd like to move the recommendations on page 321.
Is there a seconder? Seconded. Any comments, questions? All those in favor? Thank you. We'll move on to Annex F, insurance invoices over 100,000. And did you want to speak to this, or I think it's fairly straightforward?
Yeah, just questions, Chair, if there are any.
Okay, any questions from the board? Would someone like to make the recommendations? Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Thank you. And communications. Annex G, number 8, on page 326. First, a motion to receive the correspondence. Moved and seconded. All in favor of receipt? Thank you. And basically, this is asking, is there anyone on the board who would like to put their name forward to be on the executive for AVICC? Don't hide under the table. Okay. All right. Not at this time. Okay. All right. No one's jumping up and down and saying, pick me, so I think we'll move on. We are going in camera, so there's a motion. I'd like a motion that public be excluded from attendance in the meeting in accordance with sections 91E, G, and K of the Community Charter. Moved. Somebody second that? Seconded. All in favor? Thank you. All right, and we'll go for questions. Any questions? Sophie or Connie?